Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to Living on the Edge. They say a frog never drinks all the water in the pond in which he lives. Lakhs of our countrymen living in and around national parks and sanctuaries use the same logic when they say they would never destroy what has sustained them over generations. Can we believe them? Is the present-day policy of insulating ecosystems from people dependent on them really viable? Is joint forest management an answer? And when will the conflict between the long-term goals of conservation and the everyday needs of forest communities end? Priya Sumaya takes a closer look at the people versus parks debate.
Over 250 years ago, in the present-day state of Rajasthan, 360 Bishnois sacrificed their lives to prevent the cutting of forests by their king. Nearly 100 years ago, tribals in the Chota Nagpur area organized resistance to tree felling by the British.
Many miles away from their home in the forest, this tribal dharna in the capital seems a paler version of the vehement protests of their predecessors. No fervent slogans, no speeches. Here, their weapon of protest is a hunger strike. When Living on the Edge visited the dharna, we found that most were too exhausted or weak to even speak. They have been on an indefinite hunger strike to demand self-governance, which would mean at least partial control over their village matters and the natural systems that sustain them. Tribal and forest communities are being pushed to the brink of extinction as development projects either destroy their ecosystem or conservation efforts restrict their forest rights.
ते असं आरोप करत आदिवासी जंगलची नाश करत असं पण उलट आदिवासी तर बेस सांभाळत जंगलात काय पण आणायचं हवा तर मरेल खांदी काही असं आणत ना ते उलट येईन ना डोंगराला मोठं मोठं कूप पाडत ना ते जंगलाची नाश करून टाकत आमचे डोंगराला तर तशी तथवर एवढा मोठा डोंगरचा अख्खा तिन्ही सापून ना कराया घेतला होता.
But there's little doubt that population pressure is taking its toll on the forests. As a result, the rights of forest communities is in conflict with conservation efforts. Stricter conservation laws, the setting up of national parks and sanctuaries have helped protect what's left of our biodiversity. These isolated forests and natural systems have in fact thrived and regenerated after human interference was minimized. But it also meant that forest dwellers had to be moved out or their entry into the forest restricted. Take the proposed Rajaji National Park for instance. One of the aims of Project Elephant is to ensure continuous forest tracks so that natural elephant migration is not disrupted. And so, it has been proposed that Rajaji be declared a national park to allow for maximum protection. But this would also mean that the Gujjars living within the forest have to move out. Forest officials claim that the increasing Gujjar population within the forest is no longer sustainable and is causing denudation of the forest. And so a rehabilitation plan proposed to relocate them in Pathri near Dehradun. But this was totally unacceptable to the Gujjars and it's not surprising. Small cement structures, leaky roofing and almost dilapidated houses were meant to replace their almost idyllic life in the jungle. Like the Gujjars, lakhs of forest dwellers are gradually being marginalized. It is estimated that over 6 lakh tribals and others living in the jungles have already been displaced in the last 2 decades. Rehabilitation packages somehow never materialized, leaving those ousted struggling for survival. The conflict between conservation and the needs of people inevitably sabotages protection programs. In many areas, shrinking animal habitat or the illegal entry of villagers into forests has resulted in serious man-animal conflicts. In retaliation, people have been known to poison waterholes or encourage poaching. When the Binsar forests in Uttar Pradesh were declared protected, the right of people to tap resin and graze their cattle was suddenly withdrawn. In protest, villagers threatened to set fire to the forests. Last year, fire spread through the hills of Uttar Pradesh and Himachal. Huge areas of the Binsar sanctuary were razed to cinders. It is difficult to pinpoint the cause for the blazes, but forest officials claim that the problem was worsened simply because the villagers did not come forward to help put them out.
गांव वाले जो हैं बिल्कुल सपोर्ट के लिए नहीं आ रहे हैं, हमारी सहायता के लिए। गांव वालों के मालूम होता है कि हम लोग आग बुझाने के लिए आ रहे हैं, देख लेते हैं, देखने के बाद भी मदद के लिए नहीं आते हैं।
जो आग लगती है तो गांव वाले मदद क्यों नहीं करते?
गांव वाले ये आवाज़ देते ही नहीं गांव में। प्रधान पहले से तो पहले तो प्रधान जी को मालूम पड़ती है ना, प्रधान जी को दिया उन्होंने आवाज़, फॉरेस्ट वालों ने। प्रधान जी देते गाँव में खबर, आज कोई खबर देता ही नहीं।
In fact, some tribals claim that widespread degradation is caused not by local people but by large-scale felling that is either illegal or sanctioned by the Forest Department to meet industry's needs. And so environmentalists and NGOs are increasingly advocating that people be involved in conservation programs. Giving forest communities partial control over natural systems might ensure that they will be preserved, since their livelihood depends on it.
The government doesn't believe that people can manage their resources. I'll show you thousands of acres of land, of forest land, which people have preserved. And you look at the difference between what is left with the forest department and what is with the people, you will not be able to believe that it is possible.
It doesn't mean that tribals will have a full and complete control over what happens in their areas. But it does mean that in terms of decision making with regard to the natural resources there, with regard to developmental projects and so on, they would have a primary and a very sort of predominant role in what's happening.
For instance, in return for protecting the forests and restricting grazing, they could be given access to some forest produce like grass or honey, or they could get a percentage of the profits made from the commercial sale of this produce. This has actually worked in some areas. Parts of the Aravalis were regenerated by the very villagers who were once responsible for its degradation.
The most ideal situation, which would be any forester's dream, would be when the local people themselves would manage the forest and the foresters would be looking from a distance that it's being managed properly.
If joint forest management is the answer, protests like this one shouldn't go unnoticed and brushed aside as just another dharna. The press chose to ignore it, and it's unlikely it reached the ears of the government for whom it was intended. Forest communities, after all, are not a powerful lobby.
There is this folk tale I'd like to share with you. It was spring. The old neem tree cleared his throat softly as the smoke-laden winds descended upon him. There was a roar of engines in the distance, and a Maruti came to a screeching halt. A young couple, probably bunking college, stepped out and approached the neem, whispering sweet nothings to each other. The young man proceeded to inscribe with a knife the proclamation of his love on the tree's bark. The old tree bled stoically. As the young couple was leaving, the neem whispered an unmistakable blessing. Such are the ways of nature. Trees have given us so much. In return, at least we must try and protect them. Do not cut or mutilate them. Also prevent others from doing so. Remember, every action of yours counts.
Still to come, a new lease of life for a traditional occupation, and whether dissection needs to be as cruel and undiscerning as it is. From traditional communities to traditional occupations. If you think nomadic herdsmen are a part of our prehistoric past, think again. In response to Dev Kumar Ray of Dungarpur, who wants to see a story on nomadic tribes and their way of life, Tisha Srivastav travelled to western Rajasthan. Let's see who we meet.
Who is this man and why are these people praying so fervently? Well, if you ever happen to visit what's now famous camel safari land in western Rajasthan, you'll immediately understand what people here are praying for. Eking out a life in this hapless sandland where even cactus has a tough time, growing anything isn't easy. But they manage, with a little help from this man and others like him, who are better known as the Rabaris or Raikas, the traditional camel breeders in the area. It would seem the phrase "in search for greener pastures" was coined keeping them in mind. In the days of the Maharanas, they were the caretakers of the royal camel herds. Royalty is around no more, but the camels are still the most important lifeline and the rural version of a status symbol here. Today there are about 4 lakh Rabaris like Harji Bhai who are on the road travelling in troops as the camels graze.
तो बजे कोई है कि ये बजे हुनी मेली जानी जो तो लारे कोई बच्चा ने लीजा कोई सीट दे कोई ऊँट करने खा दे जनवाज तो बजे दवीजा कोई भी गरी तो घनी हर आवे जी.
According to the old system, the farmer landowner in the area would let the Rabari graze his camels on his land and the jungles nearby in return for fertilizer.
वो खाद दो जमीन में डाल देना वो यूँ फायदा नहीं होता खर्चा तो बढ़ डबल लागे वो 4 बार तक में हाँक वाओ तो ठीक रहे.
By this arrangement, a barren and uncharitable land got a very rich and cost-effective fertilizer. The farmer in return was supposed to provide the Rabari food. This way, the camel and his master were taken care of, and the farmers of western Rajasthan got a rich harvest, without money ever changing hands. What's more, at the end of their financial year, so to speak, these Rabaris would go to the livestock fairs like Pushkar and sell a well-bred 2-year-old male camel for anything between 4,000 and 12,000 rupees and take the 100% profit home to their villages after this long, all-expenses-paid trip. The homecomings were always something to celebrate, something to look forward to. Especially for the wives who had accepted the long separations with a very matter-of-fact kind of fatalism.
बैठी मौज करे घरों की काम नहीं करे घरों काम करे खाना पीना सब बैदा बीजा सब करे वेड़ा ऊपरे जाए रजगा वाले.
But the homecomings these days are less than special, with forest lands being converted either into sanctuaries or agricultural lands, and with generous governmental subsidies encouraging farmers to use chemical pesticides. The Rabaris are beginning to find their traditional lifestyles unsustainable and their camels a burden they can do without. As a result, a large number of Rabari women have been forced to work as hired labor at construction sites, crushing stone after stone in order to augment diminishing family incomes, while the younger Rabaris are beginning to migrate to the large towns and cities in search of employment.
पहले तो जी ऐसे तक खुला था, जंगल बंद नहीं था इतना, तो ऊँट चराने लेके जाते थे तो खाने के लिए मिल जाता. अभी है ना जंगल बंद हो गया, आजू बाजू में नहीं इसके लिए खाने के लिए नहीं ना, तो ऊँट कम होते जा रहे हैं इसलिए.
Ironically, the Rabaris, living encyclopedias on the camel, its behavior, its ailments, its treatment, and a reserve bank of ecologically sensitive tree lopping techniques, today stand accused of indiscriminately lopping trees to provide fodder for the camels they breed.
पोजीशन ये हो गई है कि वेजिटेशन को काटते तो हैं लेकिन उसको वापस पनपाने के लिए अभी भी उन्होंने अपना कुछ भी कंट्रीब्यूशन नहीं किया है.
The question that naturally arises is, the forests are not going to come back in a hurry, so now what? How can the Rabaris find a sustainable way out? While the government seems to be ignoring the problem altogether, the School of Desert Sciences at Jodhpur is experimenting with this seemingly viable option. Yes, camel milk, It sells for half the price of cow's milk and is renowned for helping cure diseases like tuberculosis and diabetes. The experts running the project believe that if the camel becomes profitable, there will be more reason to take better care of it and live off it. As of now, the milk is selling well in every town that the Rabari passes on his grazing tour.
With the milk marketing, the additional money which they get, they can bring this money for the certain inputs like healthcare, veterinary care, feed. And naturally, if their health is maintained, their economy can be maintained by getting more of the milk and getting better price at the Puskar fair and other fairs.
But it's only just begun, and it's too early to say how successful the project will actually be. For a truly long-term solution, employment through afforestation schemes will tilt the balance in the camel breeders' favour, as well as halt the environmental degradation and forced migration. Till then, the Rabaris are proud, colourful people who help make India the melting pot of cultures that it is, may just have to depend on their own ingenuity and their prayers in order to survive.
This is the world's rarest tortoise, and the measures developed in Western Australia to ensure its survival are helping to save other endangered species. The Western Australian Government and the Worldwide Fund for Nature have started a recovery project at the Perth Zoo to save Sida Medora umbrina, or the Western swamp tortoise, from extinction. Only about 30 swamp tortoises are left in the wild, but the zoo is breeding hatchlings to build up the population. It was almost impossible to breed the tortoises in captivity until Dr. Gerald Coupling from the University of Western Australia adapted the ultrasound techniques used on pregnant women. The turtles now hatch more successfully because egg development can be studied for the first time, enabling necessary changes in the mother's diet and living conditions. Urban development has destroyed most of the narrow strip of swampland near Perth, the only habitat of the western swamp tortoise. It was considered extinct for more than 100 years, until 1953, when a schoolboy found two of the animals crossing the nearby Great Northern Highway. This led to a Save the Tortoise campaign, and the swamp area was declared a reserve where the last wild community is protected from its main enemies, foxes and people. Captive bred tortoises are released in the swamp, and radio tracking is used to monitor their progress in reproduction. In this way, the numbers of Sida Medora umbrina are slowly growing again, and the Australian techniques are being adopted by other countries, trying to preserve rare tortoises. Perth has become the world centre of conservation biology, and the zoo is also researching ways to save other endangered species.
Anindya Chakravarti of Jaipal Guri writes, "The other day I read in the paper that over 200 people died of malaria in Assam. In our school days, we read that frogs feed on mosquitoes. If you want to find a link between these two apparently incoherent statements, visit any higher secondary school and peep into its biology lab. You will find the answer. In the name of science, teachers and the taught indulge in useless slaughter of these poor yet useful amphibians. Most of these students will not take zoology as their future course. Then what is the logic behind such inhuman indulgence? I think models should be used for dissection." Using Anindya's letter as a starting point, Zareen Taj set out to find some answers. Here's what she came up with.
Meet Rini, a baby guinea pig. She is barely 1 month old and lives in an animal house. She has been brought into this world for one reason only, to improve human knowledge of the respiratory system of mammals. When she is 2 months old, she will be dissected in a lab. Each year, thousands of animals like Rini are used for dissection by students studying medicine and other life sciences. Frogs, fishes, rabbits, guinea pigs, dogs, monkeys, butterflies, rats and cats used in various experiments are supplied by dealers who make a living meeting a seemingly unending demand. Ranaji, short for Rani de Tigrina Tigrina, has come from a small pond on the outskirts of Delhi. He was caught while basking in the sun and delivered to this lab in a gunny bag along with many other frogs. Today, it is Ranaji's turn to be pithed. He will be first stunned or made unconscious by banging his head against the hard surface. Then he will be cut open and his heartbeat studied as warm and cold water is poured over his heart. Animal suppliers keep an incessant watch on the habitats of animals suitable for dissection. Where live animals cannot be transported, they are killed and put in jars with appropriate labels. Monkeys, dogs, cats and pigeons are caught in the wild or picked up off the streets. Rats, for instance, are trapped in houses and ration shops. Once caught, they are kept in crude cages. The lack of food and space often leads to their eating each other. For those who survive, death comes with a whiff of chloroform. Chloroform is actually meant to anesthetize animals before dissection. Once unconscious, an animal can be cut open without causing it any undue pain. However, pressures of time and the shortage of funds implies the essential first step is sometimes rushed over or skipped altogether. Stunning the animal is considered painless and more effective way of making smaller creatures like frogs unconscious. However, even this method is discarded in certain experiments.
We don't always stun the frog. As far as stunning the frog is concerned, it's a more painless method of petting it. But in experiments and cardiogram and all, we're not supposed to be stunning the frog and we're supposed to be petting it without stunning it. So that is pretty painful.
The roots of the modern day emphasis on dissection of animals can be traced back to the Victorian era. The days when body snatchers stole corpses from freshly dug graves to study anatomy are history. But the tendency to cut it up and see how it works is more alive than dead. Dissection on animals forms an essential part of the syllabus both at school and at college to study anatomy, biology, physiology and evolution. To study evolution, fish, butterflies and earthworms are used. Frogs and rats are chosen because the placement and functioning of their organs and reaction to various drugs are similar to humans. Most of these animals are easily available. In fact, some feel dissection fulfills an important function.
Because of its short life expectancy, the experiments can be easily carried out on the frog and then they can be correlated to the human life.
The question is, how far is dissection of animals really indispensable? Are there other methods that can replace existing ones? And what about the right of students to choose whether to cut or not to cut animals?
I think that killing of animals is a wastage of them, because when there are other sources available, we can rely on them.
Most of the students are mentally prepared by their biology teachers a year before dissection actually takes place, that they will be taking a life. As a result of all these findings, we started pursuing all the authorities. Nothing happened. We got all kinds of ambiguous replies from the education department. Then finally, we were really frustrated because we wanted to do something. And since reasoning really never worked out, we gathered a very strong team of 11 people, 11 parties, and we've gone to court.
So if a person has a right of conscience, and right of conscience would imply that what I'm doing is right or whether what I'm doing is wrong. Now if that right is there, then I've got definitely a right to choose as to whether I should dissect or I should not dissect.
But are alternatives available? Three-dimensional models, slides, video films, and even computer programs like the CompuRat and the CompuFrog, which give a blow-by-blow account of the various stages of dissection, could be used instead. And yet, the majority of schools and colleges in India offering biosciences continue to use the time-tested animals for dissection. No attempt has been made to make their dissection less painful or to use alternatives wherever possible. And so it is unlikely that Ranaji's friends will be spared being cut open. And Rini's death for a medical college laboratory is certain.
In 1950, the world's population was 2.5 billion. In 1975, it was 4 billion. The next billion came in 12 years, and projections say that consecutive billions will come in less than 10 years each.